Hi, my name is Kathleen Lentz. First, thank you so much both for being here. My question is for Representative Pedersen, and I was looking over the law, and I have a question regarding some wording in there that says that Washington State, if I'm remembering this correctly, will no longer recognize domestic partnerships other than in senior citizens. And my question is, what does that mean for the health insurance benefits that many people currently enjoy under the domestic partnership umbrella?
So internally on our side, probably the most difficult discussion that we had was what to do with domestic partnerships. We started with the proposition that we wanted all people to be treated equally in the state. We did not want same-sex couples to have a different set of rights from different sex couples. And one of the things that we haven't talked about, and for those of you who don't live in this world thinking about this all the time, when we originally formed the Domestic Partner Registry, we followed in the footsteps of California and New Jersey and made it available not only to same-sex couples, but also to different sex couples where one partner was 62 years of age or older. And we had quite a bit of evidence that there were a lot of families that were not taking advantage of legal marriage in that age group, either because of the potential loss of pension benefits or family pressure about getting married again. So there were a number of different ways that we could have solved for that inequality. We could obviously have just eliminated domestic partnerships and said everyone who wants to can get married. We could have said domestic partnerships would be available to everyone, regardless of their age or sexual orientation. Or we could have done what we did, which is essentially to say, on a going forward basis, if you're a senior citizen couple, or a couple that includes one senior citizen, then you can access domestic partnership, and no one else can. Everyone else will either not be in a legally recognized relationship, or they'll transition into marriage. The question about health benefits is not necessarily tied to what the state status is. So there are a lot of companies now, such as Microsoft, that offer health insurance benefits to the domestic partners of their employees, regardless of whether they're in any state-recognized relationship or not. So there tend to be forms that those employers have their employees fill out, indicating that they're in a relationship where they live with someone and share finances and whatnot. So the unavailability of domestic partnership at the state level for younger couples won't necessarily have any effect on that. As I said, your choice if you're a same-sex couple is literally going to be by June 1st, 2014, that you either you get married or let your domestic partnership become a marriage, or else you have to dissolve your marriage. And so if you chose to dissolve, if you let it just continue and become a marriage, obviously you'd have the same benefits. If you chose to dissolve it, then unless you have a company that gives employee benefits regardless of marital status, then you would lose those benefits.
Hi, my name's Tony. I have a question for Representative Pedersen, but both of you can feel free to chime in. You mentioned in your first point about marriages or civil unions in Washington not necessarily being recognized in other states. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but doesn't the Full Faith and Credit Act of the United States Constitution mandate that other states recognize those rights? And to that end, what difference, if any, would there be between a civil union and marriage in those states? And if there isn't, wouldn't there be more of a fundamental problem with intolerance against those peoples as a whole, rather than the legality of it?
So the answer is that right now there's a very actively litigated question about whether a marriage from one state ought to be given legal effect in another state that doesn't permit same-sex couples to marry. And in fact, as Mr. Backholm indicated, the voters in, I think, 31 or so states have enacted constitutional amendments that say that they will not recognize marriages from other states, in addition to not allowing their own citizens to get married who are same-sex couples. So we have a big federal question that will eventually be litigated to conclusion about whether that is consistent with the federal Constitution. The answer to that right now is not obvious. I mean, in some ways it seems to me like it ought to be obvious. Full faith and credit shall be given to the public acts, records, and judicial proceedings of every state. So you would think. The difference between domestic partnership and marriage is that very few other states have anything like domestic partnership. So if you say, I have a domestic partnership in Washington, and you go to Idaho, Idaho may well say, sure, we respect the full faith and credit clause, and so we'll give you all the rights and obligations that you're entitled to as someone who is in a domestic partnership, and that is zero, because they don't have domestic partnerships. That's the case in almost every state. There are very few states that have had domestic partnerships: California, Washington, Oregon, Nevada. Trying to think of what else, New Jersey, I guess. And then there are a handful of states that have civil unions. That number has actually declined, as most of the states in New England have shifted from civil unions into marriage and have just eliminated their civil union status. So it really is the case that this is one of those situations where the name means something because the words marriage and spouse are found in the laws of every jurisdiction. And so when you have that status and go to one of those places, either you get the rights automatically, or at least you have a legal basis under the full faith and credit clause for making the argument that you ought to be entitled to those rights.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lauren. I'd just like to thank you guys both for coming out today. I think this is a very important debate right now that's going on in Washington. This is a question specifically for Mr. Backholm. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I was just wondering, you focused a lot in your debate on the worry about the fear of a definitional change of the word marriage. But as I think most of us know, the word evolution is something that kind of goes on all the time. I mean, even the word gay itself, it has a very different connotation than it did about 50 years ago. And so I was just wondering if maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on the very specific negative consequences that come with marriage having a different definition, seeing as words change all the time, decade to decade, even month to month.
Sure. In some ways, the semantics argument isn't the heart of it, although I think it's important to understand the semantics argument in the context of just, to me, it's an odd thing that we're debating anyway. Just kind of the analogy that I used in my discussion about opposite-sex sisters. You know, what is that? I mean, the response that we have to that is the same response we would have had to have of same-sex marriage 20 years ago. Like, what is that? Now, you're right, the language does change, which is why I shifted. There's a difference between what is and what ought to be. And I still, I don't object fundamentally to the idea that a term or concept that has a meaning that it once did not. But again, when we look at the precedent that's created, and then when we look at the idea of living in a world that is genderless or moving toward genderlessness, I don't think that's something that we agree upon, and I don't think the costs outweigh the benefits of doing so. So I think fundamentally the question is this good public policy? Does it pass the test? Is it something that's going to work well for us 7 generations from now? And I think the answer to that question is no. But the semantics, I think, we just have to understand, because it's such an emotional argument that, you know, we're just kind of like, well, it's equality. It's just, you know, it's just being nice to people. It's just being fair, you know. But when we understand what we're doing in the context of other language, when we're just redefining nouns, it just, I think it puts it in an important context. So that's why I made that.
Okay, thank you.
If I can just add before we move on, I'd like to point out that 40 years ago, the voters of Washington State adopted the Equal Rights Amendment, which absolutely prohibits discrimination in our state on the basis of sex. Last year, the legislature passed revisions to the Uniform Parentage Act that already, depending on how you want to put it, made gender irrelevant to parentage and based parentage in our state not only on biology or genetics, but also on the intent of the parents. We know that families are formed in our state without heterosexual sex ever being part of it, or frankly without any relationship ever happening between mothers and fathers. And So the question that we as policymakers have to struggle with is how to react to that. But again, the larger question, the larger point that I want to make is how often there's an attempt to shift the debate away from what it is right now, which is about the question of whether the state ought to be in the business of discriminating in the provision of marriage licenses, and to something else, which are these different debates about the treatment of gay and lesbian people in our state.
Okay, and I'm going to respond to that. Because, again, the state is always going to be discriminating in the issuance of marriage licenses. And that's something everybody just, so you're intellectually honest with yourself. You might not want them to discriminate in this way, but it is a fiction that the state is not going to discriminate in the issuance of marriage licenses. It's only a question of how will we discriminate in the issuance of marriage licenses. And as to children being produced in, when there's no relationship involved, the question, as a matter of policy, is that something we want to encourage? Do we want to say that it is equally desirable for a kid to have no idea who his mom and dad are? And I think 4 generations from now, I don't think that serves us well. Does it happen? Absolutely. In a free society, do we accommodate it? Do we work with situations where kids don't know their mom and dad? Absolutely. The question is that desirable? Should our public policy say, hey, we want to encourage that? That's the question that's being asked. Does it happen? Of course it does. Recognizing that it does happen is a different question than do we want to encourage it?
All right, my name is Landon Whitbread, and I have a question for Mr. Backholm here. You talked a couple times about, I think, like a cost-benefit analysis, and you mentioned it's 50% of the people, or about 50%, kind of fundamentally disagree, and it was the less than half of 1% are really the ones being affected here in a legal sense. And my question is, isn't it in our system rather important to, especially in a legal sense, protect the minority regardless of what the majority feels about it? I feel like I'm just wondering if how that, I guess, translates into your cost-benefit analysis.
Sure, I want to and make the distinction that 1% of the people who have taken advantage of domestic partnership registry, they're absolutely deserving of equal protection under the law. They have it, they deserve it, they should get it, especially as individuals. One important point to make here is we are not making distinctions between individuals and their protections. We are comparing relationships based on the people who are in them. That's a different creature. We're not saying this person, when you recognize that, you guys are brothers and you guys are friends and you guys are sisters, that's not a statement about the intrinsic value of the individuals. That's a recognition of who they are with respect to each other. So we're comparing relationships based on who's involved in them, and that's what we do with parents and friends and roommates and all sorts of things. Who are they as relative to each other? That being said, the question of should they have the right to make living arrangements and do what they want to do with their lives? Absolutely. That's a very different question than do they have the right to redefine marriage? Do they have the right to say to the 50% or more of the state that thinks that is not marriage, that thinks there is a meaningful difference between a relationship that has a man and a woman or doesn't have a man and a woman, that you guys are no longer free to make choices that are consistent with your belief system, and that we're going to usher you out of the public square, which is what's being attempted. So, from my perspective, the same tolerance that we are offering to just go ahead and do what you want, make your decisions, think what you think, say what you say, that is not being extended in return.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Nakbin, and I just have a question for Mr. Backholm as well. And then, so in your first opening statement, you mentioned three points. One being bad president, and then not the principle, and the third one was the benefit and cost. So for the second point, you mentioned that it is unnatural, and from the question, the marriage between two men are unnatural, and that the children, the offspring, the human reproduction is between the heterosexual relationship, and that the gay marriage is fundamentally different from the heterosexual marriage. And then I just wanted to say that so if the human reproduction, we now know that gay and the lesbians are not necessarily the byproduct of the cultural cultural values, except that it is actually born with their innate abilities. That homosexuality is actually born innate ability. And then to say that the history already had this kind of gay people in their own history, and we made the human development and the reproduction. How is it recognizing the marriage between two men? And it's not that we're encouraging this gay marriage, except that they're already gay people and that they're already having their own things, but we're historically, how is it unnatural? How is it different?
I don't know that I used that term. I don't know that I said that I think it's unnatural, and I don't want to have a discussion about that. How is it different? The relationships are different because one includes a man and a woman, and one doesn't. Any kindergartner can make that distinction. Now, the question is that a real distinction? Is that a real difference? And yes, there are gay people, and regardless of what happens, there's going to be gay people in the future. This is not about that. This is about what is marriage, and the relationship, marriage, that is, as it's currently defined, and as I think it should be defined, it creates the greatest probability that a kid is going to be raised with its mother and father. And I think that is socially desirable. I think it's a good thing for kids to be raised by their mom and dad, and the current definition does that. It doesn't guarantee it by any means, but it creates the greatest probability that that's going to happen. Now, if we create equivalency between things which are different, then we're saying the only way we can say these relationships are identical is if we say it's totally unimportant for a kid to know both its mom and dad. And I think 3 generations from now, I don't think that serves us well. Because we have a tremendous problem with fatherlessness right now, which I know has affected people in this room. And I have a son, and the last thing I want people telling my son is that your presence is not important in the lives of whatever children you may have. It's a fiction. And if we begin to make decisions on that belief that, oh, you're the mother, it doesn't really matter, you're the father, it doesn't really matter, just as long as there's adults around to take care of them, that's something that 3 generations from now we'll regret.
So just to sum up then, this current definition of marriage is saying that this encourages the heterosexual marriage, and thus we should encourage as a society to have a heterosexual marriage.
I think there is a special place for marriage as it is currently defined, because that is the only environment in which a child is going to be attached to both its mother and father, which should be a desirable thing. We should be able to recognize that's good for us. And so it doesn't exclude anything else. You know, people have babies without being married, without being in any relationship. There's adoption, there's foster, there's IVF, there's all sorts of things that do happen. And free societies allow people to make other choices. This is a question of what are we going to encourage? What are we going to promote? Are we going to pretend these things are the same? And if we pretend they are the same, I think we will regret that.
But isn't the society basically encouraging the heterosexual marriage?
Yeah, and it should.
Okay.
Because it attaches children to their mother and father. And children to be attached to their mother and father, that's a really, really good thing. That's a really good thing. And we want that to happen. The more often kids know and are loved and are raised by the man and woman that they came from in a healthy environment, the better off everything is. Our poverty problems go away. We have more responsible adults who are better employees, who run a better economy. We have less crime. We have less people on drugs because they're stable. They came in environments where they were loved and nurtured, and they had a sense of who they were. And they had an ability to relate to both their mother and father, which allows them to benefit in all sorts of ways. We are encouraging that, and we should encourage that. That's my point.
I'd just like to observe another occurrence of the classic non sequitur. It does not follow. I just want to say that there is no way in which allowing gay couples to marry is going to produce fewer children who are growing up in houses with mothers and fathers. I'm not sure if the suggestion is that heterosexual couples are going to look and say, gosh darn it, those gay people are getting married. We are not going to want to be part of that institution anymore. Or if the thought is, I'm really not sure what it is, that somehow heterosexual households are going to come apart at a greater rate than they're coming apart already. The simple fact is that we have literally thousands of children, including 4 of mine, who are growing up in households that don't have the legal protections that come with marriage. And no more children grow up in households that have marriage because of denying it to same-sex couples. In fact, exactly the opposite is true. Exactly the opposite is true. If you allow same-sex couples to get married, it is more likely that more children will grow up in families with 2 parents and will have that protection, will benefit from that protection. So I suggest to you that it's not only that it's a non sequitur, but the actual fact is exactly the opposite, as what Mr. Backholm suggests.
My name's Cody Elledge. I'm kind of worked out well for my question here. I was wondering what protections aren't available to same-sex couples in the state of Washington that may not be given through domestic partnerships, but they're not available to. So things like, well, I couldn't give you examples. What benefits can't you get a hold of through some legal means? Is it that you just want those benefits to be bestowed upon same-sexual or same-sex couples by definition of saying, okay, we want those with marriage? But I mean, you talk about protections. I'm not sure what protections are available to you.
Yeah. So these are the things that I was trying to mention earlier. So fundamentally, within the structure of the domestic partner registry, you can't get the right to an automatic name change. Okay. So for my partner Eric and I, we thought that it was really important for our kids growing up that when they went to school or were in any other setting, that the adults who interacted with them would understand immediately that their parents were both their parents and shared the same name. So that's one concrete thing. I talked about the web of private contracts that we have. So the idea that when you sign up for a shareholders agreement or any other sort of private agreement, whether that's a software license or whatever, that refers to a spouse, that you automatically would have your family included in that contractual arrangement, that's an important one. With respect to the federal government, we have a lot of very consequential rights and obligations, such as Social Security benefits, the right to file joint tax returns, that flow directly from the answer to the question, are you married or not? And that do not come with domestic partnership. And then beyond the borders of our state, anywhere that we travel, whether that's New York or Connecticut or Massachusetts or other countries that allow same-sex couples to get married, such as Canada, our domestic partnerships are legally meaningless in those places, but a marriage would have meaning. So, so there are significant legal consequences that come with the difference in terminology that to some people seems like it's only semantics. Beyond that, though, I'd say it's not as if the reason for people to get married is to get a package of benefits. Fundamentally, if you ask people why they get married, and this is the same for heterosexual couples as it is for gay and lesbian couples, they want the opportunity to get up in front of their family and friends to make a public commitment of their love, and then have the societal understanding that that is the significant person in their lives. And requiring the relationships of same-sex couples to have a different name to be branded otherwise than marriage puts a stamp of some disapproval on them that I think is unfair and frankly inappropriate for our government, which is our government, to be doing.
So I guess I'm not sure if I'm trying to think and talk at the same time. It's not working. Is it okay if I ask another question? I'm sorry.
If you have another question.
I have another question. So the benefits. My question, I guess, was clear enough. You still have access to those benefits. I mean, you still draft up the contract that says my partner and I and things like that. Like you could still have your.
You can do that for the private contracts if you have a chance to negotiate them. You cannot do that for the other benefits. There is no private contract that I can do that will allow me to get Social Security benefits if Eric passes away.
Isn't that a federal problem, though?
That's a federal problem, yeah. But then there are other federal issues such as federal employee benefits, where now it's been well established, at least in our circuit, that the federal government is required to give employee benefits to the same-sex partners of employees based on valid marriages. There is no way to achieve that through private contract.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, my name is Alejandro Cortez, and before I ask my question, I just wanted to say that both gentlemen, I agree strongly on both perspectives on the value of a male and a child and same-sex couple wanting to marry because they love each other. So my question is, being that I am a Latin Afro male who has had to face discrimination on a daily basis, I heard something being said such as people should have the right to refuse services on the basis of their personal values. So what is the difference between myself getting discriminated and somebody who is a same-sex couple? When it comes down to, for example, a couple wants to have their rights met by particular things at a store, what is the difference between myself getting discriminated and themselves having their rights met with that? Is that a question? Yes. For me or both?
Are you asking, is this basically like racial discrimination?
Well, to me, any discrimination is wrong. So if we're going to classify race and sexual orientation or based on marriage.
Can I interrupt you there?
Go ahead.
In the idea that any discrimination is wrong, I understand your sentiment there, and I probably agree with you, but you don't think that any discrimination is wrong. Because you discriminate every day, all day. It's the only reason you're alive. You don't walk across the street when there's a bus coming because you know that you're going to have an interruption with the bus. You don't let child molesters babysit your children. You don't let plumbers, perform surgery on you. You make discriminatory choices every day of your life. So this idea that discrimination is bad, you have to rid yourself of that. The question here is, on what basis do we make distinctions? Because we're all discriminating all the time, and we all mean well in spite of that.
So discrimination is linked towards rationality and logical common sense?
Yes, the question is, how can we discriminate? And again, this is a much broader question, and you might discriminate on grounds that I wouldn't, and I might discriminate on grounds that you wouldn't. You and I are going to agree that racial discrimination is inappropriate because people are not meaningfully different based on the color of their skin. Income levels, we discriminate on income levels all the time. That's why we have a graduated income tax.
That's not right.
Well, I mean, again, a different discussion. Maybe you think everybody should pay the same amount of tax. Probably, I know he doesn't. But the question here is, and I think this does go to a better fundamental question where I'm not even certain we didn't make a mistake in some ways with the way, because there's this balance here between the rights of the individual to be free, and that's a value for our country, and then the desire to see people treated fairly and properly and equitably, which we all share. And there's a tension. In a free society, there's a tension between those things. And we want to see fairness, and we want to see people treated right, and we want to be nice to our neighbor. But can you mandate people to be nice to their neighbor? No. The answer to that is no, because there's always going to be mean, nasty people in the world, and there's nothing that the state legislature or the federal government can do to do that. So the question is, how far are we going to go to take away the rights of individuals to make free choices for themselves in our pursuit of fairness and kindness in a world where nobody has their feelings hurt? And so I agree with you in some ways. Discrimination in the sense that you mean it, I'm not for. I think people need to be kind to their neighbor, and we need to be good to people who are different than us. But that doesn't mean we need to give the state the power to tell people that you must do this or else. That's, in other contexts, called slavery. And we're doing it in the name of fairness. Really, when we tell a wedding photographer, you must take pictures of this ceremony, otherwise you're violating our non-discrimination statute, that's called slavery. And if we're going to say, you will conduct your business in a way that is consistent with our value system, or not at all, what kind of a government is that? Is that a world that we want to live in? And that's one of the questions we're asking.
Well, we see that we're doing reverse. We are putting our personal values on a biased perception on who and who should not get married based on discrimination that doesn't seem equally fair to those who deserve it. I mean, they're human beings, they have the same rights as us.
Yes.
someone else anymore.
Yeah, people do have the same rights as individuals. That doesn't mean every relationship is the same. You understand that distinction? The two brothers, let's say we have two African-American brothers. Should they be able to get married?
Yes.
Okay,
I mean, sorry, I'm a little bit...
Well, it's fair. Okay,
not brothers, not blood brothers.
Why not? Why not?
Well, because there's a lot more morals and ethics that twine into the relationship.
So you're imposing your morality and your ethics on people because they're brothers?
Not necessarily. If they're both adults and they choose to do that...
So then they can get married, right?
Genetics.
They're brothers. They have kids. Test your logic here, people. Think. Think with your head, not with just your feelings. You have to understand the implications of what you do. Does that mean we don't like them? Does that mean they're not free to go get a job and make whatever living arrangements?
How's the genetics crossing inappropriately with like some form of disability or something with same-sex couples?
Say that again.
Why can't same-sex couples get married? Because why? You're using a metaphor or example for...
Well, it's because it's not what it is, first. And then the question is, what should it be? Should we say that those relationships are the same? Should we say they are all marriages? And that's where we get to the precedent, or the principles. Or do we think that a relationship that doesn't have a man and a woman is exactly the same as one that does? We can say that it does, and I know many of you in this room think that it does. But the question is, should it be that way? And 3 generations from now, are we going to be glad it's that way? They're different. They're certainly different, and any kindergartner can tell you that. The question is, are they different in a meaningful way? I say yes, and that's what the debate is about. Are they different in a meaningful way? Does that mean those people don't deserve, the pursuit of happiness and life, liberty, and property, and all those things that we as Americans enjoy? Of course not. It just means that relationship is different. We used to celebrate our differences in this country. Now we're eradicating them.
Okay. So, in discussing your 3 different tests for what makes good law, right? You talked about how gay marriage would set a bad precedent, and that it's basically more or less like a slippery slope type idea, right? That this precedent that we set allows other things later on to possibly be legalized. So what my question is what makes gay marriage legalization a bad precedent? Or do you agree with the same concept that interracial marriage would then be the same bad precedent?
No.
Why?
Well, the difference is, again, the precedent, and what I was encouraging you to test there is the rationalization for the precedent. The reason we don't ban interracial marriage is because we recognize there's not a meaningful difference between people based on their race. And we probably agree on that. The reason why relationships involving 2 men are different from relationships involving a man and a woman, which are different than 2 relationships involving 2 women, is because men and women are different. That's also something that you and I agree upon. There's a real difference based on gender. There's not a real difference based on skin pigmentation. So that's the difference.
Okay, so how does that establish that
And so then the rationale, again, to why it's bad precedent. Because the argument that's being made is basically our love and commitment is the same. Our relationship is in every way identical to these relationships because our love and commitment is the same. And so we have to test that logic. If our love and commitment is the same, is the rationale for making the change, we have to anticipate how else we might apply that in what other arenas. And because you can't marry somebody who's under 18, you can't marry somebody who's already married, you can't marry somebody who's a relative. What are we going to say to the 4 people, to the polygamous, to the throuple, or whatever the term is, that comes and says, hey, our love and commitment is the same? How do you rationally say, no, your love and commitment is not the same, if that's the justification?
Well, in particular for the under 18, I think we've decided as a society.
Well, that's kind of narrow-minded, don't you think? I mean, there's some pretty mature 15-year-olds.
Yeah.
I mean, who are you to say that their love and commitment is not the same as everybody else's?
I'm not. The nation has.
Well, I'm doing this rhetorically, of course. But yeah, who are you as a nation to say this? Who are you? How is that not totally narrow-minded? You imposing your moral, ethic, value system on somebody else that's not you. How does it affect you if a 15-year-old gets married?
It may not.
Exactly. So why not let him do it?
Yeah, why not?
Okay, there we go. At least you followed your logic, and there we are. So now 15-year-olds are getting married. Now brothers are getting married. Now 17 people are getting married, and they're all sharing parental rights for all the kids that they have. Because their love and commitment is the same, right?
And?
Okay, if that's the world, I'm saying that's not a world I want to live in. And I don't think any of us really want to live in the world, but I think that is the logical conclusion of the reasoning that is being offered in doing this.
All right, thank you.
I'll just respond for a second on the analogy. There are a lot of ways in which race and sexual orientation are very different, and obviously it's not possible to analogize exactly in every way between the experiences of people of color and people of different sexual orientations. That said, I think it is remarkable that at one point in our history, 42 of the 48 states banned marriages between different sex couples. And when the case began that ultimately the United States Supreme Court used to strike down those remaining anti-miscegenation laws in our country, the trial court judge in the state of Virginia said, Almighty God made the races white, black, brown, red, yellow, and Malay, and he, with a capital H, placed them on different continents for a reason. And but for the interference with his, with a capital H, purpose, there would be no cause for discussion of such marriages, right? So what I think we're fundamentally getting at, and we started talking about, I guess, in the last question, is how do we resolve the tension of what some people will claim is unfair discrimination on the basis of race or sexual orientation, and other people's very sincerely and passionately held religious beliefs. And I think in our society, as we have broadened our concept consistently over time of whether people matter, from a world in which it was only white men with property that mattered, to a world in which women and people of color and now gay and lesbian people matter. The idea that that was a problem for some people's religious beliefs has consistently taken a back seat. One of the things that's remarkable to me in all of this debate, when the marriages started happening in San Francisco in 2004 and then were spreading around the country, one of my law partners came to me and he said, you know, I was watching these news reports, straight 55-year-old white guy. I was watching the news reports, and what was really striking to me is that the people whom this affected directly were all really happy. And the people who were angry, it didn't have anything to do with. And that's, I think, the reason that ultimately our society has made the judgment that the people whose rights we need to prefer are the people who are directly affected.
My name is Jivan Durkee, and I suppose I have a question for both of you, but I think particularly Mr. Backholm. You said earlier in the questioning and perhaps in the debate that there is a difference between a relationship in which a man and a woman are involved and that of two men and that of two women. I think it's worth pointing out that difference does not necessarily indicate invalidity. And so my question for you is, based on your statement encouraging that society should encourage families in which children are raised and knowing their mother and their father, should we and do you encourage families in which children are raised by their loving and caring two dads or two moms? I'll rephrase that. Should we encourage families in which children are raised by their loving and caring two dads or two moms?
They should not be preferred. My position
is making, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
Is allowing a man and a man to marry mean that that makes that relationship preferable, or does it make it equal? Does allowing two men to get married mean that two men marrying is preferable to a woman and a man marrying, or does it mean that it is equal? Does that make sense?
I'm not sure I understand, but I think I can answer the question, is that the legal status aside, the big picture issues don't change, in that it's good for kids to be with their mother and father. Now I realize there are lots of arrangements in which people, kids are being raised in when they're not with their mother and father. And that doesn't mean the kids can't do well, and it doesn't mean I don't hope they do well. But basically, I'll propose it this way: you have one group of people with, Group A has 1 million kids. Group B has 1 million kids. You know nothing else about them except for the following: Group A, they're raised by their mom and dad, and Group B, they're not raised by their mom and dad. Which group is going to do better? I think everybody knows the answer to that question is Group A. There's going to be lots of kids in Group B who do well, and I'm glad for that. And there's going to be some kids in Group A who don't do well. But in the aggregate, and that's what we have to consider when we're thinking about public policy, the kids in Group A are going to do better because it's good for kids to have a mom and a dad. And I'm very comfortable, and I realize that he's taken issue with that today, but that's a very comfortable position. I'm glad to have them challenging the idea that it's good for kids to be with their mother and father. And so if that answers your question, it doesn't mean I'm not challenging anyone's intention. I'm not challenging how much they love their children. I'm just saying, in the aggregate, it's good for kids to be with their mom and dad. Therefore, our public policy should prefer them.
Okay. Hello, I'm Danielle. I have a very similar question for Mr. Backholm. You keep saying that it's really good for children to be with their mom and dad. Are there studies that actually show versus a dad and a dad or a mom and a mom? And also, wouldn't you think that it's more harmful for a child who does have a dad and a mom and a mom for people like you to compare that relationship to incest or brothers getting married? Because that's what you keep doing in this argument.
No, I'm testing the logic there. I'm not comparing the relationships intrinsically. I'm trying to test the logic. So the question, don't I think it's, restate the question.
Okay, so first of all, do you have studies that show?
Sure, there's loads of them.
Mom and dad versus dad
and this is something we could probably have a long debate over. Yes, there's lots of evidence that children who are raised by their mother and father do well. That's been challenged by the other side, but I can throw out all the studies and they throw out some that say that's not true. But I can rely, what I would default to is people's experience and their common sense. Because we all have lots of friends and we have our own lives. And the fact, and we know what happens when kids aren't with their parents. And
but his kids are with his parents. That's not the issue. They have two parents. You're saying that they're
not with their mother. And what I do, and again, I don't want to necessarily make this personal for him because I don't know his children. I know he loves them, and I know he's doing his best. I know that that's true. But I think that in the aggregate, we have 1 million children who are raised without a mother in their life. I think that does us a deficit. I think that causes problems, which is why I think it's good for them to have a mother and father. That doesn't mean people aren't trying hard.
You think that, but I also think that if you talk to children who had dads and dads, they would,
Yeah, you can't ask a 4-year-old what they think. Obviously that's true. They don't know different. They don't know better. But again, I can sit back, on this question, you and I might disagree with this. I am so confident that 50 years from now, I'm going to be validated in this. And here's the reason why. It's because we don't make the rules. In the big picture, in the absolute sense, we don't make the rules. There are rules of the universe that were created for us. And the world was not created so that people of the same gender would have sexual relationships and raise children. Those are just the rules. I didn't make them. We are subject to them. We don't make the rules. And so, because these are all the laws of the universe, it will be borne out over time. And you and I probably aren't going to agree on that. But that's just the way it is. And I can't change it, you can't change it, he can't change it. That's just the way it is. And so in that sense, the extent to which we figure out a way to just be consistent with the rules, things will go better for us.
Okay, I have one more question too. It was kind of like the end of my question before is, the children are obviously a big issue in this, children are going to be better off with their mom and dad, but regardless, there are children with dads and moms, and so wouldn't you think that would harm them and affect their families by saying that that's not correct? By saying that they don't get the right to have their parents be married?
I don't tell kids that.
No. You don't tell kids that. Maybe specifically not you, but by us voting against them not being able to get married.
It's just recognition of the fact that it's different. And that's okay.
Okay.
Different is okay.
Okay.
We don't have to, it's just different.
Agree to disagree.
Yeah, there you go.
I just have a...
to say something because you had reached
Why don't we do the last question?
It's just a follow-up question to that. If we're speaking figuratively, say we have a girl who's 15 and a boy who's 15 also, and they happen to have sex and have a child, and they're both irresponsible, they're young, they have no idea what they're doing, and are unfit to raise a child, even if it is a mom and a dad. So it would still be better for two 15-year-old kids to raise a child than two responsible men or two responsible women who are much older and much more prepared for a child than these two kids. But in your opinion, having a mom and a dad would still be better?
I'm not speaking to individual circumstances, and when you're thinking about public policy, it's important to think in the aggregate because we're not dealing with individual situations. And so I don't know what's the best for these two kids and these four adults or whatever, whatever collection. I don't know the answer to that because those are too fact specific. What I know, what I'm convinced of, and what I'm very confident of is that in the aggregate, the more often children are raised in their lifetime by their mother and father, that's a good thing. And that's the best thing, I'll say that.
And obviously I'll disagree with that. And I'll also disagree with the earlier point about your inability to change the laws of the universe. Maybe you can't change the laws of the universe, but this is a law that is very much in your power to decide one way or the other whether it's the right way. I respectfully submit that there are no children in mother-father families who are going to be worse off from allowing same-sex couples and their children to enjoy the benefit of marriage. And there are a lot of children in our state in families that will be better off, that will be better protected the day after Election Day if you all decide that it is okay for same-sex couples to marry as the legislature has decided. I want to invite any of you who want to be involved in that effort to come down here. I have some postcards from the Washington United for Marriage campaign. I hope that some of you will use your summer break to get involved in that. Thank you.
I also have a campaign. So if any of you guys would like to get involved in that, come see me. Thank you.